Hey folks, we are live. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Adventure Town Communique is what it's officially called, even though it's under my name, Scotty Roberts. And tonight I'm going to do something slightly different, but not so far off the beaten track as you have seen my stuff to be. Allow me just a second for a little technical adjustment of things, as all of this stuff, you think it's set up, and then you go in and you do a broadcast and everything looks different. So I didn't want the door to show or the picture on the wall to show. So let me just give me a second here to try to get this lined up. There we go. A little mundane, a little scintillating live broadcasting, if you will. And technically we're not broadcasting. It's not a radio program. It's my live stream here on YouTube. And I felt, as you all know that have followed me, that this is a great way to get in touch with you firsthand, to do the readings we were doing, telling stories, going into history, kind of dipping my feet back into the pool of doing my own sort of radio show out there. So I appreciate all of you who've been here. Chris, it's good to see you from Hawaii. Nice to have you here tonight. And we've had people from all over the world, it seems, come in, which is kind of nice. It's always nice when you look up and you see somebody from Australia, somebody else from Osaka, somebody else from Germany, somebody else from England, and plus all over the United States and Canada. So that's kind of nice, and I appreciate you all being here. Now, tonight, I'm going to... I like to just go on for a few minutes at the very beginning, so we allow people time to get in if they hadn't had a notification prior to us actually going live. Get them a little time to get in here and line up. And of course, you can see all of these videos that we've been doing, the live streams, as archived down below. And you can check them out anytime. They'll always be here on my YouTube channel. And Jeannie, it's good to see you. Thanks for being here. Willy Wonka has left the building. Not sure who that is exactly, who you're referring to there. But of course, right after this show tonight, which is airing at 9:30 Central Standard Time, which is 10:30 out east, we've got Rocky Stucci coming on at midnight East Coast time and 11 p.m. Central Standard Time. And I will be on his show right after this. So there's no long-windedness for me tonight. I'll have to be jumping right from this show over into Rocky's show tonight. So I think you'll enjoy tonight's show. I think we're going to focus on, Rocky mentioned the Fernhill House, and you'll see what that's all about when we get there. And so in honor of doing that, sort of, I wanted to get into a little segment that I think I'll try to call, and maybe we'll refine this and get a little bit better name for it. But since this is a live stream and I'm just sharing things off the cuff, we're calling it Ghost Stories with a question mark at the end. Now, as I have alluded to many times while on the radio, and then also doing these live streams and all throughout the readings of the books, I have several stories. Several is probably not the word for it. I have a plethora of stories built up over the years of things that fall into that metaphysical realm, that supernatural realm, that paranormal realm. And by the way, hey, Ron, how you doing? Good to see you, brother artist. This fellow, Ron Frisbee, an amazing illustrator artist. I'm not sure, Ron, how you refer to yourself. You can type it in the channel. I've always said of myself, I'm not an artist, I'm an illustrator. So I don't know how you view yourself, if you consider yourself to be a fine artist or an illustrator, but he does amazing work, and you'll have to go check him out. Does some good mural work, does some great illustration work. Love meeting up with other people, especially on social media, that are, you could say, brothers in arms, doing the same kind of work. And as you know, I've been an illustrator since 1977 in my high school days. So it's always good to meet somebody as good as somebody like Ron Frisbee. So Good to have you here, Ron. And so, as I was just saying, as people start to build up in the wings out there, that I'm going to be doing some ghost stories. I don't know if I get sophisticated enough with this live channel that it becomes a very pervasive part of my evenings. Then maybe we'll have certain nights of the week where we say, hey, Thursday night will be ghost night. Or and now tonight, actually, I'm supposed to have been on Jeffrey Dougherty's channel, The Christian Whistleblower. He and I have the Consequential Rapscallions that we do for an hour so every Thursday. Thursday? Yes, Thursday night. And tonight, as you know, if you're a follower of Jeff's, he's not doing too well. He doesn't feel so well. So we did not do our broadcast tonight, which allowed me to put this broadcast on instead. And so it was kind of at the last minute that I scheduled this. So ghost stories, because we talk about them so much, it touches the fringes of so much of what we do. And let me say for the record here that most of you also know me as being fairly conservative on a political basis. Now, conservatives are not well known for being also believers in the weird and the paranormal. Everybody thinks they're staunch, starched collars that are part of the religious right and do not delve into any of this mysterious stuff because it's all the stuff of Satan. And I will tell you, I eschewed that long ago. And I'm a conservative when it comes to politics. I'm a little bit, you could call me middle of the road to libertarian in some of my political views. But I'm also very open to the paranormal and to the experiences. And I hate using the word paranormal solely because it's become almost a caricature of itself out there. It's become a community in the last 15 years that has gone from interest in the paranormal and those types of fringy elements to a community that basically cannibalizes itself, eats its own, seeks for the spotlight, always wants to be out there promoting their own views, individuals in that community, and finding ways to destroy people who don't let them have the spotlight first. These are the kinds of things I experienced when I was in it. And so I said, I'm out of it. And but my belief system hadn't changed in those things. Now, as you know, I was once a very conservative fundamentalist Baptist in ministry and all that. I've talked about that a couple of times between the readings and other shows I've done here. But prior to that, when I was a kid, I was always allured by my curiosities. And those curiosities fell into aliens and monsters and vampires, and ghosts and all those things that permeate the imaginations of young kids. And of course, I grew up in the 60s and the 70s, and the television and the movies and the reruns of old movies. I remember the big thing for us was if you grew up, I don't know if this was a nationwide syndicated thing that went late night television, but I know late night television in Minneapolis and St. Paul, we had Horror Incorporated, which started every Friday night, or was it Saturday night, at midnight. And yet they share appetites. I grew up in the era of Dark Shadows, that television show, and we all loved that. And it stoked our curiosities even more. Then I was a Star Trek fan, and so science fiction and aliens and all of that, again, was the fire building beneath me. And Ron, same thing on political views, and you enjoy the strange. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of us out there. And so all of this is a background to who I am. I grew up in the curiosities of these things, and that never went away. So then I wanted to see the tools, the dynamics, the science, if there was any. Is there any way to back this up? And of course, what you really end up with is I am a dichotomous creature in that I believe in the scientific method, but I also believe that there are veils we cannot pierce. It was like Carl Sagan, who said his parents instilled in him two amazing things. And one was the absolute necessity of the scientific method, and the other was to never lose your sense of wonder. And that's kind of where I am. And you can't prove everything that you see, sometimes not beyond anecdotal stories. I have good friends of mine who would ride the line on this and be more apt to say that stuff doesn't interest me because I don't think it's real, or I'm not exposed to it enough, or whatever. Scotty, how can you believe that stuff? And I say, and it's perhaps this is a foreign thought to them, but because they haven't experienced it, I say, look, I've experienced it. I can't prove it. I've experienced it. And I always say to them, whenever somebody tells me a story of something completely strange, weird, out of the unknown, ghosts, things like that, and if I look at them, they go, bullshit, I have to hail to the credibility of the individual. And many times I have found when the story is incredible, that I meet this, it's kind of a paradox. I know the incredible story is coming from a credible person. And so you say, is this credible person gone off the deep end? Or is the credible person's story something credible? Is it something that they aren't, how would I say this? I am not, and some of these people are not governed by the pop cultural aspects of these things. Not governed by, oh, I need to see a ghost so bad that I'll manufacture it in my head and think I actually experienced it when I didn't, or I was daydreaming, or this or that, or whatever, And for me, I happen to be fairly cognitive of my senses. I'm a fairly aware person. When I look at my politics and I talk and I say I use common sense there, I use common sense when it comes to the paranormal. Now, for instance, some of you may have seen this series of pictures I put up very recently on my Facebook of the courtyard at Saqqara in Egypt, where the stepped pyramid of Djoser is, and right alongside the stepped pyramid is this courtyard, the Hebsed court, and there were some old temples that lined the sides of these, and I took a picture there, and there is a picture that is very reminiscent of all the kinds of pictures of cryptoids or Bigfoots or whatever, this style of picture where there's just a sliver of something showing, but you have no way of knowing what it was or what it is, but it looks like something. And it's funny because I took the photograph back in 2013, March of 2013. So we're talking 6 years ago. And it was only a few weeks ago, I was looking at some of those images because I was describing to somebody where I had been sitting on an old stone in that courtyard. And I knew it was in that picture. And so I was zooming the picture way up so I could see where the stone was that I was sitting on. I was going to show this person. And as I was scrolling over to the left, I saw that shoulder and arm sticking out from behind a wall where it shouldn't have been. And it looked very odd. It wasn't pareidolia, where your mind makes up pictures out of shapes. It was definitely there. I am also a Photoshop guru. That has been a status I've held for many years in advertising and publishing. And so I tore this picture apart, trying to find ways to enhance it. I couldn't enhance it much better than it was because on a big picture, it was way in the background. And but it was definitely a shoulder, part of a torso, part of a hip, an arm coming down with fingers and hands hanging at its side. But it was of somebody that was tall, somebody that would have been sleeveless or topless because you see the rounded shoulder, or it was somebody wearing a skin-tight t-shirt. But the thing is this, my having been there, and I had been there for quite a while, taking pictures, we know I was aware of my surroundings. There weren't any people there that were topless or dressed in tight clothing. There were the Galabea wearing guardians of the site, Egyptian workers, things like that. But they wear the big long sleeve, loose gown, if you will, that goes down to the ground, the galabeah. And so there was nobody there. And plus, there was a picture I took right after that one where I stepped out a little further and you could see down the lane. And if that person was in that picture coming toward me, they'd have already come to me by the time I stepped down and took the next picture. And so anyway, all of that to say this. You start pulling it apart. And I don't pull it apart because I think I need to satisfy myself, because I was already satisfied the moment I saw it in the picture. I wanted to make sure that if I showed this to anybody, there was credibility behind my claim. And so where you can't find the story credible, sometimes you have to default to what you believe about a person or what you know about a person to be credible. So this is how I gauge ghost stories. It's how I gauge stories of the supernatural, stories of the paranormal, the metaphysical, all of this stuff. And so hopefully I have built up enough credibility in the type of person I am and the way I think and the way I try to incorporate common sense into things, civics and politics and other issues of the day, that when I bring up a paranormal story, it's not going to be, oh, now he's gone whack job on us. No, my credibility should still be intact. Rocky is here. Yo, Rocky. Looking forward to being on with Rocky a little later this evening and right after this show. So, folks, in about an hour and 12 minutes, it'll be Rocky Stucci's Situation Room. I'll be joining him. And I think we're going to be talking about some of this same kind of stuff. So it's going to be a lighten up from politics Friday with Rocky Stucci. And Friday, by the way, because it starts at midnight out east. So it's the Friday show. And it's 11 p.m. here. But just place yourself in the East Coast mentally for the show. By the time the show's over, it'll be Friday morning. So tonight, I want to get into this story. And I had a couple of people ask me on a post that I put in Facebook. And I said, there's a whole lot of more story to some of these things. And somebody said, please tell us more about those. So that's what I'm going to do. Kay, Emma, good to see you. Mermania, good to see you. Is that, I think that's who I think it is. I'm trying to see. Yes, it is. Welcome. It's good to have you here, Mr. Craig. Let's see. Who else have we got here tonight? Audrey, good to see you. Christy, good to see you. Jeannie, good to see you. Ron, I already saw you and said hey. And more people lining up, more people in the wings. Chris, the first one here. So everybody, good to see you. Rocky Stucci is here. Rocky Stucci's in the room, so shut up. By the way, if you are followers of Rocky Stucci's Situation Room, you've got the Rocky Stucci's Meatball Army. There's a whole story behind that, where that came. Rocky's the emotional meatball, and you got a little of this, a little of that. And so the Meatball Army, and we've got the Meatball Army t-shirts and coffee mugs. And on the back of the brand new one is the hashtag Shut Up shirt. It says Shut Up along the back of the shoulders, and it's got the little crest over the tit. I'm sorry, I always say that. The little crest on the left with the Meatball Army logo. So you can pick those up over at my Etsy site. And thank you, Audrey, for putting those hashtags in there. And my site is, just go to my Etsy site. It's etsy.com/shop/son of a patriot. And I'm going to go ahead. Audrey, if you're sitting there and you would be willing, would you type that link into the channel here so people can see it? Otherwise, I can do it. Let me take a sip of coffee. And I appreciate you. Audrey has been Rocky's Girl Friday and big support over at Rocky Stucci's Situation Room. And there, she just did it for me. So thank you very much, Audrey. There it is. Etsy.com/shop son of a patriot. And you'll see all the shirts that I design, and we throw them up. And I love Audrey too, Rocky. Let me take a sip. Cheers, Audrey. And so now it's time to get into a little storytelling. And some of you have heard this story before. And so I run the risk of having heard it when I've been on either another radio show talking about it. I think I've told parts of this story with Rocky, or at least with Jeff. And by the way, there's a nice triumvirate for you right there. Rocky, Jeff, Scotty. We all work together. We all work separately. We all do things together. We all try to respect each other's time on the radio and on the band, I should say, and everybody. So you've got plenty to listen to between Rocky, Jeff, and myself. And I kind of Jeff goes with his spiritual talk, if you will. That's not what it is. It's something trying to plug what Jeff does. A Christian whistleblower, his studious research on things. He was like me. We were both evangelical ministers. Jeff was an evangelist with a big organization. I was into youth ministry and minister in the Baptist church. Rocky was in a mafioso motorcycle gang. So, you see how we all fit together. So anyway, we all do our own shows. We all support each other. We're all on each other's shows every now and then. So that's where I tried to squeeze into this little open window between everybody's show. And as I mentioned earlier, generally Jeff and I are doing the Rapscallions, the consequential Rapscallions we do Thursday nights. And trying to give you all a whole array of things to go to and listen to and enjoy. So tonight, it's ghost story time. And if you've heard this before, you can turn it off and go do something else. Or I would ask you just sit and listen. It differs. It's got its different tone every time I tell it, even though the facts don't change. But this was a big experience for me. Now, if any of you out there saw the show Ancient Aliens, there was one of the guys on the show, the Talking Heads, was Philip Coppens. You may remember him. He was Belgian, had the Belgian accent. He had the long curly brown hair and goatee and stuff. And he passed away back in 2013. But he and I had gotten to know each other. And on the Reptilians book, as a matter of fact, which I'm going to be doing some readings from in the near future. And you know what? I think I don't have any left in here. I have a, look at this. I got a Spanish version of Algicaido de los Nephilim. There's the Spanish edition. And what's this one? Oh, that was Nephilim. Oh, this one is the Reptilians. There you go. I got the Spanish edition of the Reptilians as well. But I don't have an English one here. Oh, yeah, I do right here. Hold on. Philip Coppens wrote the foreword for this book, The Reptilians. And this is the one that we're going to do next. Probably next week sometime we'll start reading this one for those of you who've been following me. And do readings and commentary from this book. But he wrote the foreword for this book for me. And the date that he wrote it was August 8th of 2012. So this is almost 7 years old that he wrote the foreword to this book. But so Philip's book, I invited him to speak at the Paradigm Symposium, our first one, which was in 2012. And we had the whole cast of Ancient Aliens, all the talking heads at the time. Eric Von Daniken, Giorgio Tsoukalos, Philip Coppens. Who else do we have? Well, we had George Norrie. We had, oh my God, why am I slipping on her name? Anyway, it doesn't matter. But that was in October of 2012. And at this event, Philip told me, he says, Scotty, he says, if I'm missing from any events this weekend, he says, just give me a call. He says, I've been some weird things have been going on with me. He said, I've been just like falling asleep at weird times. And he says, just overwhelmed physically. And he says, there's something wrong with me that he says, frankly, I'm a little nervous about it, but I don't know what it is. He says, as soon as this event's over, I'm going to go home. I'm going to go check this out with my docs and see what's going on. And so we made it through the weekend, and I think within 2 weeks of the Paradigm Symposium in October, Philip announced that he had developed angiosarcoma, which is a rare cancer of the heart. And by December, he was dead. So within 2 months, a little over 2 months from the Paradigm Symposium, Philip Coppens was gone. And this is where my story kind of starts. I was going to Egypt in January of that year. Now, again, some of you may have heard this story before, but I was going to Egypt with John Ward, who was living there. We were going to write our book, The Exodus Reality. And we were going to I was going for about a month to go to all these different sites associated with the book. And I remember at the Paradigm Symposium, it was Philip and his wife who said, hey, we'll probably bump into you in Luxor in January because we're working on a book together. And so we thought that was pretty cool. Well, then it was December 30th of this very year, 2013. And I remember getting the news that Philip had died. And for some reason, now Rocky will tell you, and he'll tease me and I'll tease him, and there's all of this and all of that. But I'm a fairly emotional guy, but I got struck really hard with this. I've had family members die, I've had friends die, and it didn't affect me the way this did. And I remember I got the news and I started to just weep. And I mean, I was weeping and it was running down my face and just dripping off my chin. And I remember I was standing in my garage and I'm like, what the fuck? I was saying, why am I crying like this? And every time I would think of it again, or I would let my mind drift to it, I would get the same response. This overt, what seemed to me to be over the top emotion. And I thought, okay, it's normal. It'll pass. But this went on for days. I mean, literally days. And my friend Micah Hanks, some of you may know him, radio broadcaster, author. He was staying at our house for a couple of weeks for Christmas. And he and my wife, I guess, were even talking together about something snapped in Scotty. Do we have to get him help? Because they thought this extremes of emotion was so abnormal for me. Despite being somebody who cries at The Lion King, they thought this was still extreme for me. And so a few days later, it's now January because we've gone through the new year. And I get a call from a friend of mine, David Weatherly. Some of you may know who he is. He's a shaman and an author, personality out there. And he called me up out of the blue and he said, hey, Scotty. I'm like, hey, Dave. And he said, just calling to see how you're doing. Linda Moulton Howe. Yes, Audrey, thank you. That's the name I couldn't think of. And so he says, how you doing? I said, I'm good. And I'm wondering, the tone of his voice sounded like he had more he wanted to talk about. So we did a few minutes of small talk. And he says, I suppose you heard that, Philip has passed. And I said, yeah. And it hit me again right away. And it just, boom, it was like turning on the faucets. And I'm like, David, I don't know why I'm reacting this way. And I had to just mentally push it out of my mind to get away from the emotion. And he said to me, Scotty, he said, you're going to Egypt in about a week. And he said, all I'm going to tell you is this. He said, go with an open mind because you're going to go and something's going to change your life forever there. And he wasn't talking, you're going to see the pyramids and your life experiences are going to be so fulfilled that your life is going to be bubbling over and effervescent. And that wasn't what he meant. He said, something's going to happen to you. And by the way, just before that, he said to me, he says, you remember when we were talking a long time ago, I told you how as a shaman, I receive messages from the spirit world. And he said, sometimes it's you're reading a book and a message hits you. you could be listening to a song or driving in the car and a thought comes to your mind. And I said, yeah, I know how that works. I get that sometimes. And he said, sometimes I just get audible messages. He said, I could be sitting in my office and I hear a voice will just say, do this, do that. And he said, that's what happened to me this morning. He says, about 20 minutes ago, I'm sitting here, and he says, I heard an audible voice. And the voice said, call Scotty. Dave said he kind of looked up and he went, okay. And he picked up the phone and he called me. And that's why he was kind of, so what's going on with you? Trying to find out what's up. And so he reminded me of that. And after we got to talking about Philip and the whole thing, that's where he said, he says, I do have a message for you. He says, your life's going to be changed forever. So be open to it. And I think this is the thing with a lot of spiritual, metaphysical, paranormal, if you will, experiences, is that we are so close to them, especially in our society where we have found no need for them anymore, and we have closed them off, so we don't experience them much anymore. And so he's saying, don't close this off. And because I got to tell you, folks, I was a great one for closing things off. As much as my curiosities were there, you don't want to be afraid. You don't want to be scared. You don't want to think that you're being led astray by stupid, emotive, unsubstantiated feelings about something that's just in my head or my psychological makeup. And so you tend to shut it off so it doesn't affect you, which is what I was doing. And David was in essence saying, don't shut this off. So we ended our conversation. Things calmed down internally on the emotion of Philip Coppin's passing. I still didn't know why I was so overtaken by the emotion. And so fast forward now, a couple of weeks, I'm already in Egypt, been traveling around with John Ward, and we come to a place that has been very near and dear to the book readings we've just been doing, as well as what I talked about last night with the Senenmut connection. And that is, we went to Deir el-Bahre, which is Jesheru is the other name. It's Hatshepsut's funerary temple in the Valley of the Kings. Well, not in, it's on the other side of the mountains of the Valley of the Kings. It's in Luxor. It's about 15 minutes drive from John's house. I see it in my head. So you just go down the road here to the T and you take a left. John's house is 5 minutes away. And all the temples are there. We're right in the temple area. The Ramesseum is there. Tutmosis III is there. Seti I is there. All these temples going down in Luxor, down along the road. Deir el-Bahri, one of the most glorious sites there. You go to the end of that road and you take a left, and on the other side of the cliffs, her temple is that low colonnaded, you see the colonnades, the big ramp going up, low, set in the big cliffs. And right on the other side of that cliff ridge is the Valley of the Kings. If you could climb up and over, it'd take you a few minutes, but you have to drive around or find a different way and climb over the top. But we just drive around the road, and up on the corner is Howard Carter's old house, which is now a museum. Howard Carter is the man who discovered King Tut's tomb in 1926. So we were driving around, and we went in, or you drive around, you go into the Valley of the Kings. So that's where this is all situated. And so we were there one day, a couple of weeks after this conversation with David, about a month after, not quite a month after Philip Coppins died, a few weeks. And we're at the tomb of Senenmut. And I mentioned this, I think it was last night or the night before when we were talking about Senenmut built this temple of hers. And his tomb is there, one of his tombs. And Ron, it's an amazing place. I got to tell you, brother. We went, John and I, and I'll expound on this a little bit more, but we traveled all over Egypt for that month. And he lives there, of course. He's an archaeologist there, British archaeologist. So he had passes. His wife had passes. She's the PhD on their team, the head of their mission, and their archaeological mission. And so we went everywhere. We were out in the Sinai. We climbed mountains in the Sinai. We did all kinds of stuff. But this particular site was to see her temple. And so we're there one morning and early afternoon. And we went down to Senenmut's tomb. It's where one of his tombs is there. It was all closed off and sealed up. The Polish archaeological mission works that site, and they had it sealed and we're not working there right now, so you couldn't get in. It was all chained up. And it's kind of neat. It's got this long, maybe 20-foot long, just think of a roof of a house, about 8 feet wide and 20 feet long, peak in the middle, all the way down on 4x4s over the stairway that starts to go down to the entryway to this tomb. And they affectionately call it the Polish bus stop, the archaeologists there. But so we're at the Polish bus stop, and it's as you're looking at Hatshepsut's temple, down the road and up the ramp into her temple, it was, and the mountains behind her, the big cliffs, go around the back, and they kind of semicircle around to the north. And behind me, if I was standing there, you would see the Nile River about 2.5 miles down. 2 miles down, something like that. And so we're standing there, and down in the ditches, kind of, as these cliff faces wrap around us, they come down to the ground, and you have to go off the road. You could walk a little bit, and then it drops down. There's actually rough-hewn stairways you can go in, or to climb down into the ditches, the gullies, so to speak. And down there is where Senenmut's tomb is. And so we're down there looking. Because, as I mentioned a couple of times in the readings and for the Exodus Reality book, my candidate for the historical Moses is the man Senenmut, who built all this stuff, the grand royal architect under Hatshepsut. And so here we are, we're visiting one of his tombs. He was never buried there. It was an unfinished tomb. That was one of the, so we talked last night. Was it last night or the night before? Where we talked about Senenmut, the Senenmut connection. And so we're standing there and we're visiting, and John and Maria, we're going to go up and get coffee. They have a little coffee shop there that you can go to outside the site. And so I said, you guys go up. I'm going to stand here for a few more minutes and just soak it in. And so there I am. I'm standing there. And let's see here. I'm just fine. Are you on? Can everybody hear me? Are people not hearing me? I see no sound popping up really big, but you must be able to hear me. So, all right, speakers were turned off. Good, Sherilyn. Glad you can be here. Glad you got the sound fixed. And so, John and Maria go back up the stairway, and they go down over to the coffee shop, and don't think it's not like a Starbucks there. It's open air with a roof over it, and stilts holding it up, beams holding it up, and so it's all blends into the rocky background. And so they went to the coffee shop, and I'm down there at the tomb, and it was as nonchalant as I stood. So I lit a cigarette, and I'm lighting a cigarette, and I said, "So," out loud, "Senenmut." I said, "Are you really Moses?" Because I've been writing this book on him. And I said, "Moses, are you really Senenmut? If you even exist?" So did you exist the way I was taught? I said, who are you guys anyway? One and the same? And I light the cigarette, and as I'm doing this, I'm just barraged by, I don't want to say it's emotion, because I wasn't being emotional. I was just, hey, I'm having a great time, and just totally intrigued by these sites. And then I ask out loud, are you the guy or not? Click, lighting my cigarette, and I'm just barraged, and I feel this almost like, think of standing still and a storm front coming in over your head, and the wind finally hits you. It can blow your hat back, and you just shake for a second, and you're in the storm front. it kind of felt like that internally, and I dropped my cigarette in the sand, and I start weeping. It's just rolling down my face, dripping off my chin. And if this sounds familiar to an earlier part of this story, you'll start putting the dots together. So I even stood there. And since we don't have FCC rules, I'm not going to guard my language here on YouTube so much. This is not radio. But I remember standing there, flailing my arms out and saying, "What the fuck?" I said, "Why am I crying? What is going on?" And I'm talking to nobody. And I'm saying, "Why am I crying? What?" And I remember I started pacing in a circle, saying, "What trick of my emotions or my psyche has me crying about what? Senenmut?" I said, "Moses?" I said, "That's ridiculous." And I cried so hard. You know those hard cries that you have where your face is all puffy and blotchy? And I didn't have a mirror with me, but you can feel it. Nose running, eyes all red and puffy. And I was glad I had my fedora with me. And I threw that on and I pulled that down. I took a good 20 minutes to come up out of there. And John and Maria didn't bother me. They just let me be. They thought I was just having time down there. And yeah, Audrey, this time it wasn't me. The sound problem. My internet has occasional problems here. So Spirit, glad to see you here, Spirit Heart. Lewis, good to see you. Yeah, my Indy hat. I actually don't have an Indy hat. I got an Indiana Jones hat from my friend John Ward back in 2013 after this trip. He had his own already, but I have a good friend of mine, John Penman. I might as well put in a little plug for him. Penman Hats. If you go to the Penman Hat Company, Penman, Penman Hats online. You can find him on Facebook. He's got more information on his Facebook. But Penman Hats, Michelle, better late than never. Lost time in the shower. That's the best place to lose time. And so John Penman, by the way, is a good friend of mine. He was a firefighter who was disabled about close to 15 years ago now. And so one of the things he started doing, he was intrigued with the hats from the Indiana Jones hat. And he started talk to the guys who made the original hats, some old hat ears in their 70s and 80s. And he learned all the tricks of the trade. And he started making the Indiana Jones hat, the Raiders of the Lost Ark hat. And it is, you could call it stitch quality or stitch detailed. It's detailed to the movie as a replica. It's even got what he calls the Indy turn. If you don't know this, watch next time you see Indiana Jones, watch that first movie and look at his hat. When a man wears a hat, the bow that sits on the hat band is usually over the ear. Well, Harrison Ford, when they were bashing the hat, meaning fitting it to his head, he took the hat and he cranked it a little bit to the left, and then they bashed it that way. And so the bow sits a little further forward over the temple. You'll notice that detail. So John builds it like this. And these hats, they're not cheap. He does a great job. He's an artisan at his craft. And so I got one of these hats for John. And at the same time, I wanted a good fedora to wear to Egypt. But I thought, the Indiana Jones hat, I was torn. I thought it'd be too cliche. Maybe I shouldn't do that. And so I got here. Hang on. I'm still going to be here, but let me grab something. I'll show you something here. So the hat that I got is this one. This is my hat, and it is not the Indiana Jones hat, although it's a fedora from the 30s and the 40s, the look. This is Penman's, he calls it the Casablanca. This is the exact replica of the hat that Humphrey Bogart wore in the movie of the same name, Casablanca. So this is my hat, and this is the hat I wore to Egypt. And I love this hat. Only problem is this. I did this to it. See that? So I can't really wear it anymore. I'm going to have to get this hat replaced. I wore a hole in that because I was pinching it the wrong way. I'd pinch it there, and I wore a hole in it. It's not the hat quality. It's the mishandling of it. And this hat's been around the world and back several times. So now generally in my old office, I just had it on a hook, and it would just sit on a hook on my wall. And so that's my hat for all those who wondered. Go to Penman Hats. You can get this hat, the Casablanca. You can get his. I'll show you one more thing. This is just pushing a little bit of John Penman on you here, but he used John and I as kind of his poster boys for a long time. You can go to his website, Penman Hats, and there's a whole expose of photos of John and me all over Egypt wearing these hats. Well, he made a hat for me, which again is not an Indiana Jones hat, but this is a fedora that John Penman made for me out of just different, it's beaver. This is a vintage ribbon that's about 70 years old. And he just made this for me and sent it to me. So you can see the bow, by the way, that I was talking about. You can see that's where the bow normally sits. And on Indiana Jones, it's forward. So those are my hats. Had to bring it up since we were talking hats. So anyway, I'm down there in front of Senenmut's tomb. This is where I left off. And I'm weeping. I'm trying to get control of myself. When I finally do, I think I can't go up there because I'm looking pretty puffy and red and snotty faced. This was my hat that I had on. And so I just tipped it a little forward, and I go up like this, and it's sunny out. And John and Maria are talking to our guide over on the road. You have to have, we went into certain places that are off the beaten track there. And so you always have to have one of the Ministry of Antiquities guys with you, even though they're archaeologists and they have the passes and so on. So I went up and I stood up on top of kind of the cliff that overlooks where I was just standing in front at the Polish bus stop there at Senenmut's tomb. And I'm looking down there and I hear John Ward walking over. And I thought, oh, shit, because I'm still all puffy and snuffly. And so, you know, pulling the hat down. And John says, he walks over, he goes, "Are you ready for some coffee, brother?" And then he comes over and he looks and he kind of turns and he goes, "Look at me." And I look at him and he reaches a finger up and he wipes a tear. He says, "You've been crying." And I says, "Well, yes, I have." And he says, and I turn away from him and I said, "Don't give me any shit." And he said, "Look this way." And I looked that way and he snapped a picture of me. And he says, "Ha, Scotty crying for posterity." And I said, "You're an ass, you know," and so on. And so I'm trying to make light. And I think he knows. He knew what was going on. He got it. He didn't say too much. And I said, "Sorry, you know, I'm a guy. I have to apologize for crying." And he says, we'll talk. Let's talk." And then Maria came over, his lovely wife, who is the head of their archaeological mission. And she's Swedish, beautiful, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, gorgeous, intelligent, amazing woman. She walks over and she overheard us talking. And she says, "John," she says, "let's go get coffee." She says, "Scotty, you need to go back down there and ask for clarity." She says, "Here in Egypt," she says, "I'm a scholar and I'm an academic." She says, "Home in Sweden, I'm a witch." She says, "So you go back down and come over when you're ready." And she takes John by the arm and drags him off. He says, "Later, brother." And so I don't know that I have it here. It may not be here. I don't know where I had it. I had my journal from when I was sitting there. So I went down and I journaled about this. I had a little leather strap journal that I would keep in my cargo pants. And I wrote about it. I dated it. It was February 4th, 2013. And I sat in front of Senenmut's tomb on the ground, and I shoveled dirt from around Senenmut's tomb into all my cargo pockets. And I brought that back home, and I put it all into little vials and things like that. And I wish I had been more prepared. I would have grabbed that journal and read you what I wrote in there. But I'm not even sure where it is off the top of my head. So it could be down in these boxes. It could be somewhere else. I don't know where it is. So I'll find it another time. But I journaled. And so we went home after that. A few more weeks, I was back home. Now, let's pick up the story with Philip Coppens, who I started it with. He was going to speak the next year at the symposium, but now he had passed away. It's now April or so, and I talked to his wife, and I invited her to come and speak in Philip's stead. And we got to talking on the phone, and I said, I never told you about how I felt when Philip passed. And I said, I wanted to be very sensitive to the way you must feel about all this. And I told her how, you remember I told you at the beginning of this story how it had hit me so hard I had cried, and David Weatherly and all of that. And you'll go to Egypt, and Egypt will change your life forever. And so I'm telling her this story. And I said, something strange occurs to me. I said, when I got to the part about crying at the tomb of Senenmut, it was, I told her I was at the tomb of Senenmut when I was crying, and she said, remember when Philip and I said that we might meet you in Luxor while you're there because we're writing a book together? She said, do you know what the book was? The topic was the relationship between Senenmut and Hatshepsut, the pharaoh queen, their relationship together. And she said, it's extraordinary that you were at the tomb of Senenmut. I would love to have gone there with you guys. And I said, when I was there and I was crying, I said, that reminds me of something. Now that you mentioned Philip and you, I said, I cried the same way at the tomb as I did at Philip's when I learned that Philip died. And I said, very similar. And she said, we were supposed to be writing that book together. She said, did you know that Philip believed that he was a reincarnation of Senenmut in his life? I said, I didn't know that. And she said, now, she said, there can be more than one reincarnation of people out there. And she said, you hear 300 people say they're reincarnations of Cleopatra. She said, that's not impossible. She said, Philip didn't believe he was the reincarnation, but a reincarnation of Senenmut. I said, that's extraordinary. And she said, what time of day, when did you say this happened to you? And I went and I got my journal, and I said, well, it was February 4th, 2013. And she said, oh my God, because she journaled about that very same day herself. She said, do you know what happened to him after his death on this trip? And she said, Philip's brother and I were sitting at the hotel having coffee, and she said, Philip physically manifested in front of us. Just boom, right there. Moved something on the table and disappeared. And she said, we both looked at each other. And now they're very much into this. That's their spirituality. That's the things they believe. So it wasn't strange for them, but it was still shocking. It was Philip. And so they saw Philip. And she said, do you know when that was? That was February 4th, 2013, right around, and she gave me the time. It was early afternoon. And I said, that's the exact same time I had this crying at the tomb of Senenmut. That was the exact thing a few weeks earlier I had when Philip died. And now I learned that Philip believed he was a reincarnation of Senenmut. And there was all this little bits of data started coming together. I get chills as I'm talking about it. And I said, I don't get it. I don't understand what the message would be. And she said, maybe the message is you're on the right path. Keep pursuing the path. And on top of this, so by the way, all of this blew up into when Philip died, I was struck down emotionally. David Weatherly, shaman, says, go to Egypt. You're going to experience something that will change your life forever. And at the tomb of Senenmut, the crying experience that related directly to what my reaction was when Philip died. Then I find out from his wife on the same day, same time in the afternoon, she experiences a physical manifestation of Philip and tells me that Philip is a reincarnation of Senenmut. There's a bunch of dots connected for you. Now, after that experience, remember I told you when I was reading the book, I also had a vision at Saqqara. And it was about a week. It wasn't a week later, it was a week earlier, where I sat on that stone and had that vision in the Hebsed court at the stepped pyramid of Dozier. And this is where I caught that photograph that I posted last week, a week earlier. And it was a year later that Chris Conway was there with us when we took a bunch of people along with us and redid the trip. Chris Conway, if you remember the British show Most Haunted, after their famous psychic, Derek Acora, they supposedly found he was lying about things, canned him. And then Chris Conway came on for a couple of seasons, Scottish psychic medium. Well, he's a friend of mine, and he came along on this trip. He sat on that stone at Saqqara with me and said, somebody connected with you here last year. Here in Egypt, he meant. Now, get this, so I don't mix up the story. We're at the Step Pyramid. I have what was that vision, and I told you about that vision. I'll recap it here. I was sitting there in the rubble of that courtyard mid-afternoon, and all of a sudden, everything changed. I was lightheaded. The shadows were long off the temples. It was evening. There were long torches coming out of the coved peaks. There were torches coming out that were lit. I could feel the breeze. I could smell incense. I could hear chanting. The courtyard was clean. It was pristine as it would have been in its day. And there was a line of priests in front of me that was walking toward me, and they all had platters with things on the platters, jars and things. And bare-chested, bald, the white kilts. And they're walking right toward me in a line, and then about 20, 30 feet from me, they turn to my right, and they start walking toward the little cove temples. And then everything changed, and I was back where I was, and eyes watered up. I wasn't crying. It was that chill that goes through you, like, what the hell was that? What did I just experience? And then it was a week later, I had this experience at the tomb of Senenmut, crying. And so a year later, Chris Conway sat with me at the stepped pyramid and said, there's an Egyptian man who is attached to you. He said, he's attached to you because you think the way he thinks, is what he's telling me. And he says he won't give you his name until he can trust you. It's about 3,500 years ago. Should put him in the 18th dynasty. He's an official of some kind, or a physician, or a what would be our equivalent of a PhD, and all this. And he said he would be attached to me whenever I was in Egypt. And I am wondering, I don't have these dots connected yet, but that same trip with Chris, a week later, we're at the tomb of Senenmut at Shepset's temple. And he says, your man is here. and he's got a robe on this time, and he is offering. Oh, and by the way, when Chris was sitting on that stone with me, he says, "Your man." His first thing was he kind of chuckled and he said, "I've got an ancient Egyptian man here who says he's connected to you, and 3,500 years ago, and he's naked." I said, "Great, a naked Egyptian man?" And he said, "He's wearing a nappy." He said, he's Scottish. And I said, "You mean a diaper?" Yes. And I said, "Probably a loincloth." And so we laughed about that a bit. Now I'm looking back at these photographs a couple of weeks ago, and what do I see? What looks like a bare-chested, very dark-skinned man, his arm. Connection? I don't know. So, yeah, Audrey on Naked Man in the Desert. There you go. How you doing? And so all these little dots start going together. At the end of that trip with John, where I had this experience, I went back home, and about a week later, he called me and said, "You've left something here, brother, in the house in Luxor." And he goes to explain not a thing, but a somebody. And PK, see the picture of the person in the arm? Yeah, that's the one that's on my Facebook. You should be able to find it if you want to see it. So John says, "You left somebody here." And Maria came and said, they were talking, and they said, John, cut to the quick. Somebody there had a vision of some kind of a little girl and a group of men, ancient. She was putting her hand to us and saying, "You've done a lot, and you're getting there. You're on the right path, but you haven't taken my hand yet. Take my hand," the little girl says. And I said, "What does that mean?" And and Maria just said, she postulated that she thought we were just on the right path. Just keep doing what we're doing, keep pursuing. And so now take all of this I've told you and move it out a little bit. This all happened in 2013 is when this happened. Chris Conway's experience with me in 2014. In those ensuing years, in between, I've had more people come to me with this February 4th, 2013 date connected to Philip Coppens. Other people have made this connection with me, not knowing this story. I held back on telling this story publicly for several years. It was only a couple of years ago I even started mentioning this, because I felt it would have been disrespectful to Philip or his wife. And there was a time where I felt enough time's gone by that I started to talk about it a bit. But there are other things that have happened in relation to getting psychic types of information on this. And psychic information baffles me sometimes. Sometimes it leaves me saying bullshit. Goes in my bullshit can, which sits alongside my desk. Other times it's so profound or simplistically spot on that I say, how would you have made that connection? And before I was even telling this story, before Philip Coppens even came into it, somebody else brought up that date and said they had a vision with Philip Coppens, and then he mentioned my name or something. And I said, "Why Philip Coppens?" He said, "We don't know. But it was on February 4th of 2013. I said, "That's extraordinary." And a couple of other things like that happened. And some of those I haven't even written down. I've just remembered that it happened. I don't even remember who the person was who told me that. But they wouldn't have been privy to these other events and these other stories. When we wrote the Exodus Reality, I did not include these stories in there because first of all, we were writing the book to academics. Well, on an academic level, to academics, and also it was writing to everybody, but we knew that academics would be taking a look at it. So I kept some of that stuff out of that book. But these events took place, and other things, other weird supernatural things have happened. Tonight, and I may tell this on tonight's show with Rocky, when we were on our way, we're going to be talking about the Fernhill House on Rocky's show, as we mentioned the other day. And it's a place where we had some spiritual experiences. And on the way to that event, it was Rocky, John, and me. We called out. We had a moment of silence where we were kind of calling out on our own gods, saying our own prayers of protection and so on. And I actually reached out to this man that's ancient Egyptian man that said he was attached to me. And I remember, with my eyes closed, riding in the car, we're all quiet. I said, I know that you said that you would only be attached to me in Egypt, that you'd never leave Egypt, but that whenever I was there, you would be attached to me. I said, I feel almost silly in my head. I said, but I said, do you really exist? Are you really there? And if you are, can you hear me? And I said, I'm not in Egypt now, but do you have the ability to be attached to me? And I said, do you have the ability where you are now to act as guardian for me? If I go into something spiritually dangerous, are you there to be like a guardian to me? And I said, I would ask you this. I said, if you are there and you can hear me and you have the ability to do so, would you extend to me your protection from the spirit world, from an Egyptian perspective? And I'm sitting in the car, and some of you may have heard me tell this story before, but you know how with the statues of Senenmut, and I have a bust, but it's not here, it's in storage still. He had the Princess Neferuri with him, and in the statue, his head is coming out and over her head, and his arms are wrapped around her. And so I'm sitting in the car and I'm driving, and Rocky's quiet and John's quiet. And I feel, oh, God, folks, I wish I could put the words and express to you verbally the words of how it felt. It was, I got to say it with my eyes closed, because that's how it was, this feeling of warmth, of strength, of almost like that detachment from reality where you're pulled back a bit, and you've separated your cognitive mind from what you're doing. You're still aware you're in a car and driving and so on, but I pulled back from this, and I feel this weightiness, and I literally, not figuratively, literally, I felt somebody put their arms around me from behind, like behind my shoulders, the embrace, and the chin on the top of my head, like this. I got no words with it. It was like that. And the visual in my head of that was Senenmut, the statuary, with the young princess. And so what I felt at that time was that this man that Chris Conway, not discovered, what's the word I'm looking for, spoke to at Saqqara, that said he would be with me whenever I was in Egypt, attached to me, and so on, and all this other stuff, that he was actually there in Minnesota, putting his arms around. And I begin to wonder if this high official, who wouldn't give his name, who said that he connected to me because I thought the way he thought. He was a high official in Egypt 3,500 years ago. May this have been Senenmut himself? I don't know. I'm speculating, because of the experiences with Philip Coppens, the presence at Senenmut's tomb a week after this fellow that gave the vision I had, the photo I took that shows this person. All these dots start coming in together and being connected. So I will tell you this. I am either hesitant to make that conclusion because it sounds so damn out there, or I just literally don't know. I'll give you one more story because this just came into my head. This may solidify it a bit. When I first got to know Rocky, back right around the same time, 2014, he was over at the house and John was over. John was showing him how to use the divining rods. And some of you who know, who've seen my other readings, is that this is the set that John Ward had made for me in Egypt. A local artisan in Egypt cast these and anviled them, blacksmithed them, and so on. So this is what John uses, and that's how they work. And they cross for yes, part for no, and you can do other things with them. And so John had his set like this that he was showing Rocky how to use. They were sitting in my garage. And I went downstairs while they were talking to my office, and I grabbed one of those little vials of sand from Senenmut's tomb. I was going to give it to Rocky. It was about this size. And I walk back into the garage. They're still talking. And Rocky's got just one of John's, and he's asking questions and seeing if it can point to things and things like that. Get yes and no's with the two. And so I took this, and I'm across the room from them, but 8 feet from Rocky, and I set this little vial down on the credenza out in the garage, and I had a little office set up out there too. And they're talking, and that's over to my left on the tabletop credenza, and Rocky's in front of me, and John's over there. And so I said, here's a good test question for you guys. I said, Rocky, why don't you ask if there's anything of Senenmut in this room? And I'm referring to that jar of sand. I want to see if that divining rod points to that for Rocky. Am I frozen? Can you all hear me? Let's see if I come back on this. Let me know. Somebody type in the window when you can see me if I'm frozen. Okay. All right, I'm here. I just saw PK said I was frozen again, so hopefully I'm back and it was just temporary little glitch. So, and delaying 30 seconds seems to stop buffering. Okay, hopefully that'll help. All right, so there I am in the garage, and Rocky's got one of the divining rods, and I say, ask if it can point to something of Senenmut that is in this room. And I'm referring to the sand in the vial from Senenmut's tomb. And so Rocky's sitting in front of me, his side to me, and so he holds this rod up, and the rod starts moving, and I'm thinking it's going to point right at that sand, and it goes past the sand, and it points right at me. And I went, and do that again. And so Rocky asks the question again, and it swings around, it passes the sand, and it points right to me. The question again was, is there anything of Senenmut in this room? And right then and there, I had some genuine tears come up. That I wasn't weeping, but I was just, my eyes watered up. And I went, oh, that's extraordinary. I'm wondering what that's telling me. And so again, you start putting the dots together in this whole story. And I don't know what to make of it. I would say that we were being told we were on the right path. I don't know if it was telling me that Senenmut was the historical Moses and that I'm absolutely correct, or that if I'm just on the right path. And does the path have anything to do with the book we were writing or the path in general? And I didn't mention that week later when we were, Chris came the year after these things happened to me. He saw the man. Then a week after that, we were at Senenmut's tomb again. And I told him what had happened there. He says, well, your man is back here now that we just met last week. And he's got a robe on, and he's offering you a big ruby. He says he's holding it out in his hands to you. It's about the size of a tea saucer. and it's gilt around the edges in gold. And he's handing this to you. I said, where can I find that? And I'll take it. Thank you. And he said, no, I'm serious. And then we had to go. We didn't have much time to spend there because we had a group we were bringing with us. And we told this to John, and John, his eyes about popped out of his head because he knew what that meant. The ruby was a symbol of a group that he'd been part of, the Esoteric Order of Thebes, which is now the Esoteric Order of Luxor. And it was a symbol of that group, and it's too much to get into what that was because it was something John was involved with. But I found that it was connecting John and I together because of that ruby was a symbol of the group that had been lost in a shipwreck in, they're assuming, in the early 20th century, late 19th century. So there you go. Yeah, I've learned some neat things with the rods too, Brian. They're pretty spot on. I don't use them enough to trust myself at the moment to do anything with them. But, you know, all I could do would be to say, not to be a dog and pony show, but guys, if you can show me, and this is the way John showed me to hold them, just like this. And if I ask a yes question, to cross them, cross the tips, or a no question to spread them out. So if I were to stand here and say, did I see Senenmut's tomb? Was I there? Could you answer yes or no for me? Let's see. Was I at Senenmut's tomb in Luxor? So what you see happening is they're very gradually drifting together. Now, I hold these differently. I have to hold them so they just sit. So I don't do anything with my hands. This is the way John had them made. Did John have these rods made for me? I'm either not holding it right or you see they're drifting together very slowly. So it could be also the way because I usually hold them a bit lower. But well, there you go. Here, take a look at this. If I do this, and I say, all right. I say, did I have a vision at Saqqara? Okay, you can see if I raise up, they're crossing. So I would have to practice with them more, get used to, again, how they feel in my hands and things like that. So I have to hold them right. I have to be standing right. Because John did a lot of standing, and he'd walk with his and map out structures below the surface of the sand. He did that. So anyway, that's it. That's my, if you will, my ghost story for tonight. And we're really out of time as well, because we got Rocky coming on in about 9 minutes, and I'm joining him. So I got to go once again, splash water on my face, and put on a different hat altogether. So thanks for listening, folks. If you've got some comments you want to make, please like the video below. Helps me out here on YouTube. And if you've got some comments about tonight's ghost story, if you will, go down there and make some comments to me. I'd appreciate seeing that. Wide open to them, and I try to look at them right away. And Judy, welcome, even though shoot, you missed it. Sorry. We got started a little earlier tonight. But Judy and others, you can listen back. Judith, good to see you. Share and like, thank you. Brian, thanks for being here. PK, thanks for being here. And I try to always get a reminder out on my Facebook that we're doing these. And you're supposed to get announcements from here at YouTube. If you clicked on the little bell when you subscribe, that's supposed to send you announcements that I'm going on. So watch for that. I don't know how soon they go off, but you can also check out my Facebook. I'm shooting for, keep this in the back of your head, roughly between 9 and 9:30 every weeknight. That's Central Standard Time, which would be 10 to 10:30. Make it 9 o'clock Central, 10 o'clock Eastern is what I'm shooting for. And the only time that would be different would be Thursdays when I do the Consequential Rapscallions with Jeffrey Dougherty at 9 p.m. Central, 10 p.m. Eastern on Jeff's channel. So I'll see you here again tomorrow night. Come over to Rocky's channel right after this, and I'll be over there with him. We'll be talking about the Fernhill house. We're actually doing another paranormal show on that topic. So come on over. And in the meantime, please go see, and Audrey had put it in the chat room a little earlier here, my Etsy page. Buy some of the shirts and the hoodies and that stuff that we have available. It's my Son of a Patriot site. Don't let it throw you. It's not political. It's more patriotic. It's more love of country and other things as well. I actually have a Senenmut shirt because I'm writing a book on Senenmut. So you can go over there and see Brother God, Senenmut, Brother God. If you want to get that, kind of in light of the last 2 nights, you can do that. So go over and see our stuff, etsy.com/shop/Son of a Patriot. So thank you very much. Go to my website, scottallenroberts.com, and you can see all my stuff over there. And, of course, come on over to Facebook anytime you want if we're not friends there already. Thanks for being here. Prep yourselves. You got about 6 minutes until Rocky comes on, and so I'm going to go do some duty and get some more fresh coffee and see you over on Rocky's page. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. Love you all. Hope to see you soon.